February 2019. Liberty Libby Squire, a 21-year-old second-year student at the University of Hull, stood in front of her shared house on Wellesley Avenue, fumbling for a set of keys that had somehow vanished somewhere between the alcohol and the late winter snow. Just a short walk more, and she would be home. Just one more call, and she would hear her mother's voice from High Wycombe. Tomorrow, everything would return to normal. She thought she only had one cold night to get through before curling up in bed and sleeping off the feeling of being lost. But on the ice-streaked pavement, a silver car pulled over. A voice, gentle, well-timed, almost caring, asked, "Are you okay? Get in. I'll take you home." The tone was soothing, like a thin blanket against the cutting wind. "Don't worry, it's close." And only a few minutes after Libby stepped into that car, somewhere in a fog-covered park on the outskirts of the city, a short, sharp scream tore through the night and then fell silent. Weeks later, where the River Hull meets the Humber estuary, a young woman's body was pulled from the water, carried far from the city, bearing the traces of a night violently stolen. Behind her death lay a darkness that had waited patiently, a primal hunger masked by politeness, and a city stunned to realize how paper-thin the line was between a ride home and disappearance. And this is the story of Libby Squire. A story that began with a few trembling steps in the cold and descended into the pit of predation, violence, and silence. The deeper you go, the colder it gets, because the ordinary nature of those first few minutes was the very trap that made every warning come too late. Look closely, and you'll see why this case haunted Hull for years. It didn't just shock the city, it forced everyone to confront how fragile the boundary is between kindness and evil in everyday life. Are you sure you're in a safe place right now? Imagine this: a normal night, laughter from a party still ringing in your ears, and because of one seemingly harmless offer to help, everything turns into a nightmare with no way out. We all believe tragedy happens to someone else, somewhere far away, until it knocks on our own door. A moment's hesitation, a misplaced trust, sometimes that's all it takes to cross the invisible line between life and death. This story isn't just a chronicle of crime, it's a warning about the fragility of safety, the darkness disguised as decency, and the way fate can be sealed in a single breath. As you follow this story, don't see Libby as just another name in the news. See her as yourself, as any ordinary person who might have stepped into the wrong orbit of evil. Share your thoughts below, because every word of awareness today might save someone tomorrow. And if you want to keep walking with us through stories that change how we see the world, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because right now, we're going back to that fateful night when the silver car stopped by the roadside and destiny turned into darkness. Liberty Anna Libby Squire was born on the 1st of January 1998, the very first day of the new year, as if she had been sent into the world to begin everything good. The Squire family in High Wycombe, a quiet town in Buckinghamshire, welcomed her with radiant joy. Libby was the eldest daughter of Russ and Lisa Squire, the big sister to 3 younger siblings, and in everyone's eyes, she was a source of light, lively, witty, full of energy, with a gentle yet sharp smile that made anyone near her feel at ease. Friends said she had a refined sense of humor, a way of making people feel comfortable and connected, as if the world itself grew lighter and warmer whenever Libby was around. To her mother, Lisa, their bond went beyond words. "I love all my children," but with Libby, there was something different. Sometimes we didn't need to speak, we just knew. They called each other every day just to exchange a few trivial words, or simply to say, "I miss you." No one could have imagined that the last time Lisa would hear her daughter's voice would be right before their entire world fell apart. Since childhood, Libby had been afraid of the dark and haunted by deep water. She never liked the sea, and even at swimming pools she would stand by the edge, her eyes tense as she stared at the still surface. As she grew older, she tried to overcome that fear, dipping her feet into the water, but that icy sensation still unsettled her. Yet she loved to explore, loved museums, travel, and new adventures. She was introspective, almost never posting on social media, using her phone mostly to call her mother and a few close friends. At school, Libby was bright, conscientious, and hard-working. But there was a time when her mental health collapsed, and her A-level results didn't turn out as hoped. She later regained her balance, grew stronger, and applied to the University of Hull, drawn partly by her affection for the small northeastern port city, and partly by her desire for independence, to start a life that was truly her own. In September 2017, Libby stepped onto the campus of Hull University with hopeful eyes. She was writing the first chapter of her youth. There, she quickly fit in, forming a close circle of friends and beginning a relationship with a young man named Connor, someone who cared for and protected her deeply. To her family and friends, the months from late 2018 to early 2019 were the happiest time of Libby's life. She was stable, doing well at school, full of optimism, love, and affection for the city that had become her second home. She began talking about her future, sometimes joking that she would become a journalist, then saying she wanted to dive deeper into philosophy. Though shy by nature, Libby enjoyed going out with friends, sometimes to bars, but she hated drugs, disliked excessive noise, and always kept herself grounded. Her friends never forgot how she looked on those nights out, the petite girl in a faux leather jacket and sneakers, eyes bright, smile radiant. She seemed confident, yet those close to her knew Libby was always afraid of walking alone at night. Whenever a party ended, she chose the brightest route, or asked a friend to walk with her. She believed that light was the safest place to be. The 31st of January 2019, a Thursday night that seemed perfectly ordinary. Libby and her friends had planned to go out early, to kick off the weekend ahead. Around 8 p.m., she arrived at a friend's house, bringing along some wine, turning up the music, and laughing loudly. Close to 11 p.m., the group took a taxi to the Welly, a popular student nightclub in Hull. Inside the cab, Libby was still singing, still joking, radiant as ever. At 11:18 p.m., CCTV captured her and her friends waiting outside the club. But Libby had drunk too much, and the bouncers refused to let her in, saying she looked too drunk. After some discussion, her friends decided she should head home to rest. They called a taxi and told the driver to take her back to her house on Wellesley Avenue. At 11:29 p.m., her friends helped her into the car. Her eyes were half closed, but she turned back, smiled faintly, and called out, "I'm fine. You guys have fun." The taxi ride took barely 5 minutes, just over a mile to her student house on Wellesley. At 11:34 p.m., the car stopped under a sky, lightly dusted with snow. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Her breath turned into fog, and the pale yellow streetlights shimmered against the slick, icy pavement. The driver saw her stumble out, assuming she had made it home safely, and drove off moments later. But Libby didn't go inside. She stood in front of the door, fumbling through her bag for her keys. Perhaps they'd fallen out earlier, or in her intoxicated haze, she no longer knew what she was looking for. Some witnesses later recalled seeing her collapse face first into the snow near the gate, then slowly get up and wander in the wrong direction, away from her house, toward Beverly Road. The dim streetlights cast her shrinking shadow across the white ground, fading, blurring, until only a trail of uneven footprints remained in the midnight snow. Libby was losing her sense of direction. She trembled, tears mixed with alcohol and frozen air. Her lips turned blue, her hands shaking so badly she could barely stay upright. That young woman who had feared the dark since childhood was now alone on one of Hull's quietest streets. Near midnight, a group of male students living nearby heard soft sobbing outside. When they opened the door, they saw a brown-haired girl wearing a short skirt, a leather jacket, and sneakers, crouched by the roadside. Her body curled up from the cold. Feeling uneasy, they rushed to help her inside. In the warmth of the house, Libby sat huddled on the sofa, her hair and coat damp with melting snow, her face flushed from cold and drink. They asked her name, her address, but Libby only shook her head, mumbling incoherently. One of them handed her a cup of warm water. She gripped it with trembling hands, took a few sips, then fell into a long silence. The only sounds in the room were the ticking of the wall clock and her heavy breathing. Suddenly, Libby stood up, her voice strained. "I have to go home. I want to go home." The boys tried to stop her, urging her to rest a bit longer, but Libby resisted, pushing past them and stepping out the door. One of them noticed she had dropped a set of keys by the gate, but Libby was already gone, staggering into the white night without looking back. She kept walking along Beverly Road, where the lights grew sparse and the wind sliced like a knife. Along the way, a few passers-by stopped to ask if she was okay. Some even offered to call the police, but Libby waved them off, her voice hoarse. "I'm fine. I just want to go home." The confusion made her irritable. She snapped at them, gesturing for them to leave. They stepped back, uncertain, unaware that their decision to let her walk away alone would become a memory that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 11:50 p.m. CCTV footage captured Libby Squire sitting hunched on a stone bench at the corner of Beverly Road and Haworth Street. Snow had gathered on her shoulders. Her hair was tangled and damp. Her head bowed low, her hands covering her face, her body trembling uncontrollably. The faint light from the street lamp stretched her shadow thin and fragile, as if it might dissolve into the night. Home was only a few hundred meters away, yet in that moment, it might as well have been miles. The wind howled through the trees, and the occasional passing car vanished into the dark distance, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sentient. 12:05 a.m. The 1st of February 2019. A silver Vauxhall Astra rolled slowly toward her. A man stepped out playing the part of the Good Samaritan with a practiced smile. "Are you okay? Let me take you home," he said softly, his tone calm, soothing, deliberate, the kind of voice designed to disarm. Libby looked up and saw a tall man with glasses, a youthful face, and seemingly harmless eyes. In her intoxicated haze, she couldn't see that behind that polite smile was a hollow soul. She shook her head weakly, her lips moving but words barely forming, and she started to step back. He moved closer, slipping his coat over her shoulders and bending down to pick up the wallet she had dropped. "It's freezing, you'll get sick. Come on, I'll take you home." "It's close by," he said with patient assurance, the kind of patience only a man who's done terrible things many times could perform so smoothly. Libby nodded faintly, her voice hoarse. "My house. It's on Wellesley." He smiled, nodding quickly. "I know where that is." And he did because he lived nearby. That night, he was the kind man helping the helpless girl. He helped Libby up and guided her toward the car. She leaned heavily against him, her steps uncertain on the slick ice. He opened the passenger door and gently lowered her into the seat, then leaned in to fasten her seatbelt tightly. Later, he would claim he did it so the seatbelt alarm wouldn't beep. In truth, it was to make sure she couldn't escape if she woke up. At 12:08 a.m., the car pulled away from the corner of Beverly Road, swallowed by the frozen night. No one saw Libby Squire again, only the red glow of the car's taillights cutting through the snow, then vanishing as if the city itself had swallowed her whole. The Astra sped into the darkness, two silhouettes consumed by the empty road. Surveillance cameras along Beverly recorded the journey barely 3 minutes long, yet forever etched into Hull's history of crime. The car turned off Haworth Street, curved along Beverly Road, then veered onto Beresford Avenue before accelerating north. Not toward Libby's home, as he had promised, but to a desolate patch of land at the end of Oak Road, where the last streetlight had already gone out, leaving only snow, wind, and the faint sound of the River Hull lapping against its banks. A place no one passed by, a place quiet enough to hide anything. On the way, Libby began to sense that something was wrong. She leaned toward the window, staring out at the dark treetops and unfamiliar streets. "Where are we going?" "This isn't the way to my house," Her voice was hoarse, laced with fear, but the man said nothing. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror, eyes cold and vacant. The farther they went, the darker and emptier the streets became. "Let me out! You're going the wrong way!" Libby shouted, fumbling to unbuckle her seatbelt, but the strap was pulled so tight it wouldn't move. Then, with a sudden screech, the tires locked against the ice, sending a chilling echo through the night. The Astra came to a halt in the middle of an open field. Libby panicked, yanking at the door handle locked. "Open the door! Let me out!" she screamed. The man turned, his face twisted by lust, his eyes glowing with a feral light. "Be quiet," he hissed, then lunged at her. Libby's scream pierced the night, sharp and desperate. "No! Help me!" she thrashed, clawed, fighting for her life. He struck her hard across the face, her head slammed into the window. The world flashed white, then faded to black. He grabbed her by the hair, dragged her over the driver's seat, threw open the door, and hurled her into the frozen ground. Her sneakers flew off, her small purse hit the mud with a dull thud. Libby tried to crawl away, but he was on her in seconds, forcing her down, pinning her arms behind her back. She screamed, scratched, hit her fingernails, tore deep lines across his face, marks that forensic examiners would later confirm were hers. "You bitch!" he roared, blood running down his cheek, and his hands clamped around her throat. Libby gasped, her voice reduced to a rasping choke as her small fingers clawed at his wrists, helpless. Even as she began to lose consciousness, her body going limp, the predator did not stop. He yanked violently, tearing at her clothes in the snow. The sound of fabric ripping cut through the silence like a blade. The young woman was barely breathing, her lips parted, her body trembling faintly. But the man leaned over her, grunting, his breath heavy, unleashing every vile impulse within him. In that empty patch of land, there was nothing left but the coarse rhythm of violence and the crunch of snow beneath a dying struggle. When it was over, Libby's body lay motionless, her skin pale beneath a dusting of snow. Her tangled hair matted to her face, as if the winter night itself had swallowed her whole. A few hundred meters away, around 12:15 a.m., Sam Alford, a resident living near the River Hull, was lying in bed when he heard a distant scream. Long, strangled, and haunting it echoed, then fell silent. He sat up, rushed to the window, and looked toward Oak Road Park. In the distance, he caught a glimpse of a man emerging quickly from the riverside trees, hunched and hurried. Sam strained to listen, but all he could hear now was the wind and the faint slosh of water hitting the bridge pillars. Hesitant, he picked up his phone to call the police. The line rang, but he hung up, afraid he might be imagining things. By the muddy bank of the River Hull, the air hung thick with the stench of damp earth, cold fog, and guilt. The man stood panting, sweat and blood streaking down his face. At his feet lay Libby Squire, small, still, her clothes torn, her hair tangled and dusted with snow. Strands of her blonde hair clung to his bloodied hands, caught during her final struggle. He stepped back, eyes fixed on her lifeless body. Then he crouched, nudging her shoulder with the tip of his shoe. No response. A flicker of panic crossed his face. If she wasn't dead, if someone found her, he'd lose everything. He turned toward the river, its surface black and silent beneath the mist. Without hesitation, he bent down, lifted Libby's limp body, and dragged her across the icy mud. Each step carved 2 long trails in the snow. At the water's edge, he stopped, gasping for air, and hurled her into the freezing dark. A single dull splash broke the silence, then nothing. The surface smoothed over again, calm and cruel. Libby's body sank slowly, pulled into the depths of the hull, as the man stood watching until the water went still, and finally exhaled relieved. 12:19 a.m. A traffic camera on Oak Road caught the flicker of a silver Astra's turn signal. The monster inside him had been fed. But what was left of the man, the tiny, flickering fragment of humanity, began to tremble. The man's name was Powell Relowitz, 24 years old, from Poland, living just a few streets away from the girl whose life he had stolen. To neighbors, he was quiet and hardworking. A young husband, a father of 2 small children, holding down a steady job at a local meat processing factory. By day he smiled, exchanged pleasantries, pushed a stroller through the neighborhood. But at night, that mask slipped away. Behind the wheel of his familiar silver Vauxhall Astra, he became a hunter creeping through the student areas of Hull, where yellow streetlights glowed through the trees, prowling for prey like a nocturnal predator. What drove him wasn't hunger, it was a craving that never slept. When he returned to his small house on Raglan Street, Powell opened the door softly. Inside, his wife and 2 children were asleep. The scent of warm milk and blankets drifted from the bedroom, a world completely separate from the metallic tang and muddy stench clinging to his skin. He slipped into the bathroom, stripped off his clothes, and turned the shower on full. Hot water washed away the dirt and blood, but nothing could cleanse what was crawling beneath his skin. He scrubbed until his hands bled, washed every item of clothing, scoured his skin raw. Later, investigators using ultraviolet light would find faint traces of blood on his car seat stains that neither soap, nor water, nor fear could erase. He looked into the mirror. The face staring back was wet, smeared, streaked with blood from the scratches she had left. Powell dabbed antiseptic, then rubbed toothpaste over the wounds, an old trick for quick healing. When it was done, he slipped on clean clothes and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock read nearly 2 a.m. Beside him, his 3-month-old son stirred slightly in his sleep. It was a scene of false calm, a peaceful image masking the horror of a body sinking into the freezing river. Suddenly, Powell remembered the coat, the one he had draped over Libby's shoulders and left behind. His heart clenched. That coat carried his DNA, his blood. At 2:25 a.m., the Astra returned to the scene. Cameras recorded him stopping for less than 5 minutes. No one knows exactly what he did, but detectives later believed he went back to retrieve the coat, to make sure the body had sunk, perhaps to tidy up the ground. Then he drove home, climbed into bed, and lay down beside his wife. Moonlight slipped through the curtain and cut across his face, pale, empty. Powell closed his eyes and told himself, "It's over." Outside, Hull slept on. The snow kept falling softly, and the river Hull kept flowing quietly, carrying a terrible secret. The next morning, the 1st of February 2019, the sky hung heavy and gray over the port city. In the shared house on Wellesley Avenue, Libby's flatmates woke up and called her name. No answer. Her bed was untouched, the blanket perfectly folded. They called louder, searched every corner, the bathroom, the kitchen, the hallway, but she was nowhere. Her phone lay on the desk, her handbag on the chair, only her keys were missing. A creeping sense of dread filled the air. Libby had never spent a night away without a message, never gone silent for this long. They called friends, called her boyfriend Connor. No one had heard from her. Every call to Libby's number rang, then cut off. Her phone was still at home. By midday, as a pale sun tried to push through the gray clouds, Hull police received a report. A student is missing. Her name Libby Squire, 21 years old. She'd left home around 11 p.m. the night before and hadn't come back. Within hours of the report, Homicide police launched an emergency search operation. They treated it not as a routine missing student case, but as the likely beginning of a crime. That very morning, dozens of officers and police dogs spread through the residential streets around Wellesley Avenue and Beverly Road, the last place Libby had been seen. Officers knocked on every door, questioned residents, checked hedges, drains, bins. The quiet streets of Hull turned tense, every eye fixed on the posters that soon appeared everywhere, showing a smiling young woman with golden hair and a warmth that now felt unbearably distant. News of the disappearance spread quickly, shaking the entire city. Local media plastered Libby's photo on their front pages, the word "missing" printed in bold beneath her smiling face. Residents poured into the streets, volunteering to help police with the search. Libby's parents, Russ and Lisa Squire, drove 4 hours from High Wycombe to Hull. their hearts clamped in dread. When they arrived, they found police tape stretching across the streets, flashing blue and red lights cutting through the fog, and dozens of people calling their daughter's name into the cold air. The next day, Lisa Squire appeared on television, her eyes swollen, her voice trembling. "Libby, my darling, please call me, even just a message, a sign, anything. I miss you so much it hurts to breathe." In Hull, hundreds of students and faculty members from the University of Hull gathered at the campus gates, lighting candles, praying, singing the soft songs Libby used to love. The candlelight flickered across her photos, swaying in the wind as if hundreds of souls were calling her home. But beneath that fragile wave of hope, investigators noticed something troubling. From hundreds of hours of CCTV footage gathered across the neighborhood, one detail stood out: a silver Vauxhall Astra. The cameras clearly showed a man moving in and out of the car repeatedly, leaning into the passenger seat, circling back to the driver's side, as if wrestling with something inside. Minutes later, the car sped away, and from that point on, no one ever saw Libby Squire again. The license plate traced quickly to its registered owner, Powell Relowitz. The name meant nothing to detectives at first, but the address was right inside their search zone. The commanding officer said quietly, "Find him, now." From that moment, the cat-and-mouse game between the police and the killer began. 5 days later, on the night of the 6th of February 2019, a barrage of pounding fists shattered the silence at 21 Raglan Street. Flashlights cut through the dark hallway. Boots thudded across the wooden floor. An emergency arrest warrant was executed. The door burst open, and shadows in body armor flooded the house. Powell stood frozen, dazed, then was handcuffed as his wife and children watched in disbelief. His 3-month-old son slept soundly in the crib, unaware that his father had just been labeled a kidnapping suspect. In Poland, when Powell's mother heard the news, she collapsed in tears, insisting, "He's a good boy, gentle, kind." He'd never hurt a woman. His wife was equally stunned, unable to comprehend how the man who pushed their baby's stroller every morning could be led away in the middle of the night. At Homicide Police Headquarters, Powell maintained a chilling composure. He was cooperative, articulate, and almost rehearsed. "Yes, I saw her," he admitted, "but only to help. She was drunk, crying by the road, so I stopped to take her home." He explained that during the drive, Libby had vomited in his car. So he stopped in an open field near the River Hull to let her throw up properly. Then, with a disturbingly smooth tone, he added, "She kissed me first. We had sex. It was mutual." He claimed that afterward, Libby wanted to do it again, but when he refused, she became angry and scratched his face. "I left her there and drove home. She was alive when I left," he said, his eyes flat, his voice devoid of feeling as though describing a harmless dream. On the surface, his story sounded plausible, but to the detectives, it carried the unmistakable scent of fabrication, the polished detachment of a man who knew exactly what he'd done. Their instincts screamed deceit. If Libby had simply stormed off after an argument, why hadn't anyone seen her again, despite exhaustive searches across every inch of the area? If she'd been so drunk she was vomiting and suffering from hypothermia, how could she have consented to anything in sub-zero temperatures? And if the scratches on his face were merely from a scuffle, why had his car been meticulously scrubbed with a cleaning solution that reeked of chlorine? The investigators studied Powell's face carefully, the faint scratches on his cheeks, the chaotic pattern of claw marks, and the unease in the room grew heavier. One by one, the fragments began to align. The CCTV footage, the cuts, the smell of bleach, the rehearsed story. It was no longer instinct. It was the seasoned intuition of people who had spent their lives staring into the eyes of evil. And on that frozen Hull night, as officers quietly secured the scene, they knew Powell Relowich's game was nearing its end. But they still had no body. And without a body, Libby Squire was still only a name on a missing persons file, one everyone feared would not have a miracle ending. A warrant for an emergency search was granted. At 21 Raglan Street, officers from Homicide Police began their inspection in silence. They swept the small house inch by inch, living room, kitchen, bedroom, then the narrow attic above. The home was unnervingly tidy. Framed family photos on the walls, toys scattered on the floor, a faint scent of detergent in the air. But when they reached the attic, something shifted. The air turned colder. In the corner, behind an old wooden wardrobe, an officer spotted a pink sports bag tucked under a pile of blankets hidden carefully, as if meant never to be found. He crouched down, unzipped it, and in that moment, the mask of normalcy collapsed. Inside the bag was a secret world of sickness. Dozens of women's underwear, lace panties, bras, stockings, mixed with sex toys, some still smeared with dried bodily fluids, and hundreds of covert photographs showing women in states of undress. Each image was a stolen moment, catalogued with precision on a USB stick buried inside the bag. Deeper still, they found a notebook, its pages filled with handwritten addresses of student houses around Hull, a chilling directory of potential victims. Each line was a plan, a target. Forensic testing confirmed the horror. Powell's DNA was on multiple items inside the bag: semen, saliva, fingerprints. When detectives cross-checked old case files, the pattern clicked. These items matched evidence from a string of bizarre thefts reported across Hull's student accommodations over the previous year. Underwear disappearing, sex toys stolen and reappearing elsewhere, disturbing calling cards left behind. At the time, police had never found a suspect. Now, every piece of the puzzle fit, revealing a voyeuristic predator who had been lurking in plain sight for 18 months. In the interrogation room, Powell finally broke. He spoke quietly, but clearly, head bowed, describing a ritual that had consumed him since July 2017. Night after night, he prowled the student districts, peering through windows, watching women undress or have sex, masturbating in the shadows. When the urge became unbearable, he would slip inside through open windows, back doors, mail slots, stealing underwear and sex toys as trophies. On one occasion, he reached through a letterbox to grope a woman, laughing when she screamed. In another, he left a pair of stolen black lace panties and a used condom on her doorknob, his twisted signature. He believed he was untouchable. No criminal record, no DNA on file, and, for a time, he was right. The discoveries horrified investigators and erased all doubt Powell Relowitz was connected to Libby Squire's disappearance. Yet, in early February 2019, they still lacked the one thing that could make it a murder case: Libby's body. The law was unforgiving. They could not hold him indefinitely without formal charges. Their only option was strategy. To keep him locked away, they would charge him first with the sexual offenses to buy time. To keep the monster caged while the search for Libby continued. In March 2019, Powell Relowitz was formally charged with a series of offenses: 4 counts of voyeurism, 3 counts of theft, and 2 counts of outraging public decency, all committed between 2017 and 2019. In court, he spoke little, keeping his head bowed, his voice rasping as he admitted to most of his perverted acts. In August 2019, the Sheffield Crown Court sentenced him to 8.5 years in prison, along with an indefinite order placing him on the sex offender registry. Judge Jeremy Richardson QC said sternly, "Between June 2017 and January 2019, you carried out a campaign of sexually deviant crime. Every act was driven by your depravity. You are a dangerous sexual predator." To many, it seemed that justice, at least in part, had been done. But the detectives knew better. This was only the visible tip of something far darker. Powell Relowitz had not yet been charged with murder. And somewhere beneath the icy waters of the River Hull, Libby Squire's body still had not been found. Each night, her mother Lisa lit a candle by the window, whispering prayers for a miracle. But the investigators knew miracles rarely came after so many silent days. By late February 2019, police were forced to say what everyone already feared. We must consider the possibility that she's dead. No one, however, could bring themselves to say it aloud. On the 20th of March 2019, more than 7 weeks after that fateful night, the waters at the mouth of the River Humber were cold and murky. A fisherman working near Grimsby, where the Hull meets the North Sea, noticed something drifting among the ripples. At first, he thought it was a floating sack of rubbish. But as he drew closer, a foul stench rose from the water, freezing him in place. Amid the gray foam was a human body, bloated, broken, swaying gently with the tide. He stumbled backward, hands trembling, realizing he was staring at the remains of a young woman. Rescue crews arrived quickly. They lifted the body onto a boat, wrapped it in white plastic sheeting. Some clothing still clung to the remains, a leather jacket, a short skirt, sneakers exactly matching the description of what Libby Squire had worn that night. In one pocket they found a set of keys, the keychain bearing the University of Hull emblem. Everyone knew then the search that had consumed the city for 7 weeks was over. On March 21, fingerprint and dental records confirmed the truth. The body was Libby Squire. The news cut through Hull like a blade. Her mother collapsed when police called. After 7 weeks of prayer and hope, she would only bring her daughter home in a cold, zipped-up body bag. "My daughter was born on New Year's Day," she wept, "and she left us in the middle of winter, before anything had the chance to bloom." The site where her body was found lay more than 30 kilometers east of where she was last seen, a wide, winding stretch of river opening toward the sea. It was likely that her body had drifted along the River Hull for weeks, carried into the estuary before resurfacing as the water warmed. Forensic pathologists faced a formidable challenge. The body was severely decomposed, nearly devoid of visible trauma. They could not determine a definitive cause of death. Yet one small detail stood out: 2 deep tears inside Libby's upper lip, injuries that experts recognized as classic signs of strangulation or smothering during struggle. That tiny clue said what words no one wanted to speak. Libby Squire did not die by accident. In March 2019, the investigation into Libby Squire's disappearance was formally reclassified as a murder case. 6 months later, Powell Relowitz faced 2 new charges: rape and murder. He clung stubbornly to his old script, the fabricated story of consensual sex, and his claim that he had left her alive. 2 years passed before the case finally reached court. Because Powell was already serving time for his prior offenses, and because the COVID-19 pandemic had paralyzed the UK court system, the long-awaited trial did not begin until the 12th of January 2021 at Sheffield Crown Court. When Powell Relowitz, now 26 years old, stepped into the dock, he looked disarmingly ordinary. Close-cropped hair, glasses, a calm, student-like face. He stood upright, his eyes sweeping across the courtroom toward Libby's parents, and, chillingly, he smiled, a flicker of arrogance behind the lenses. Throughout the proceedings, he repeated the same refrain: "Not guilty." Yet his lies kept shifting: 5 stories, 5 contradictions. At first, he denied even knowing who Libby was. Then he claimed they'd merely chatted politely. Later, he admitted to consensual sex. When pressed on inconsistencies, he changed again. Libby had stormed off, then jumped out of the car. And finally, back to the oldest lie: "I left her there alive." No one believed him. Prosecutor Richard Wright QC stood before the jury, his voice hard and measured. That night, Powell Relowitz prowled the streets of Hull in a state of extreme sexual arousal, hunting for a vulnerable woman to satisfy his desires. When he saw Libby Squire, he knew his opportunity had come. He described their meeting as a dreadful intersection of fate, a terrified, disoriented young woman crossing paths with a sexual predator. Still, Powell tried to maintain his mask, the facade of the well-meaning man who got unlucky. When the defense asked, "Do you admit to having a sexual compulsion?" he lowered his head slightly, feigning remorse. "Yes. I was afraid my wife would leave me if she ever found out." He blamed it all on sex addiction, claiming it was non-violent. insisting he had no intention to kill. Then came the witnesses. Sam Alford, the man who had heard a scream of sheer terror that night, described it again before the court, like someone being suffocated by their own fear. He recalled seeing a man resembling Powell emerge from the riverside bushes just minutes later. The prosecution showed CCTV footage proving that, at 2:25 a.m., Powell's silver Astra returned to the crime scene and stopped for several minutes, long enough, they argued, to dispose of evidence. Forensic experts testified next, detailing the 2 internal injuries inside Libby's mouth, the kind typically caused when a victim is strangled or smothered while resisting. And then came the evidence that ended all doubt. Powell Relowich's semen was found inside Libby Squire's body. The courtroom fell utterly silent. The man before them wasn't merely a voyeur or a thief. He was a cold-blooded killer who had deceived, violated, and discarded a young woman like waste. The prosecutor's final words struck like a gavel. Even if Libby was still breathing when he threw her into the river, it was that act, that deliberate cruelty that caused her death, by drowning or by hypothermia. That is murder. The 12-member jury withdrew to deliberate. 6 days of heavy silence followed. Then, on the afternoon of the 11th of February 2021, they returned to the courtroom. The foreperson rose, voice firm and clear. By a majority verdict, 10 of 12 jurors, we find the defendant, Powell Relowitz, guilty on both counts, rape and murder. As the verdict was read aloud, Lisa Squire covered her face and broke down in tears. Across the courtroom, the man in the dock remained motionless. Only when the words "guilty" echoed through the chamber did Powell Relowich suddenly freeze, standing stiff for several seconds before bowing his head, his shoulders trembling as if in sorrow. But as officers led him away, his expression hardened again, cold, detached, impenetrable. Judge Lambert, her voice firm and unwavering, fixed her eyes on the defendant. "You are an extremely dangerous man," she said. "You became bolder and more reckless, convinced that you would never be caught." She paused, her tone lowering but turning razor-sharp. "Perhaps you did not set out to kill her, but your depraved actions brought about her death. It was a cruel twist of fate, a terrified young woman crossing paths with a sexual predator." Her words cut through the silence. "From the moment you stopped her that night, Liberty Squire never stood a chance of survival." Then came the sentence. Life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 27 years before eligibility for parole. In addition, he received 18 years for rape, to be served concurrently, alongside his previous convictions. The judge made it clear, not a single day from your earlier sentence will be deducted. The 27 years start from today. At 26 years old, Powell Relowitz would not even begin to glimpse daylight until at least the year 2050. Afterward, the court invited Lisa Squire to deliver her victim impact statement. She stood, trembling, eyes red and swollen. "No words can describe the pain of living without Libby," she said softly. She spoke of existing in 2 worlds, one where she pretended to be normal, still working, still smiling, and another, darker one, where she longed only to die and see her daughter again. "Each morning, I wake disappointed to still be alive, because it means another day of pain. But her memory remains, and I will never cut the cord that binds mother and child." The courtroom was overcome with emotion. Later, Lisa said that no sentence could ever be harsh enough for the man who killed her daughter, but she took solace in the fact that justice had finally prevailed. "Our Libby will not have died in vain," she said through tears. "She will be remembered for the love she gave." Libby Squire was gone forever. But the light of her life has not dimmed. It still flickers in the glow of candlelit vigils, in her mother's eyes whenever she speaks her name, and in the hearts of millions who followed her story in grief and compassion. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a warning to us all about the fragility of safety, about the perilous line between trust and danger. Cherish every moment with the people you love. Stay alert to the shadows that may hide behind a smile. And above all, take care of one another, because sometimes a single act of kindness, a simple question of concern, can save a life. Thank you for staying with this heartbreaking yet profoundly human story until the very end. If it moved you, share your thoughts below, because every word, every memory shared, keeps Libby's light alive and reminds us all, anyone could be Libby, and anyone could be the one who protects a Libby before it's too late. See you in the next story.